Extinctions occur much more frequently than you might be aware of. In fact, nearly all species that have ever evolved over the billions of years that life's populated Earth's ecosystems are gone, extinct. Some might think of extinction as the opposite of evolution, one generating diversity and the other eliminating it. But if you look at it the other way, it's clear that extinctions aren't all bad. They're two sides of the same coin. Yes, extinction eliminates diversity, but it also provides an important mechanism for sweeping away the old and makes room for surviving species to diversify in new and exciting ways. Often the pop cultural perspective on extinction is filled with visions of failure. We imagine that if organisms are extinct, they must have failed in some way, failed to adapt, failed to reproduce, or failed to keep up with competitors. The extinction of the dinosaurs is frequently viewed through this lens. Just think about how many times you've heard a quip about something plummeting toward a certain failure as a dinosaur. In this sense, the word dinosaur is used as shorthand to describe something that's outdated and doomed to fail. Let's kick off this lecture by putting that idea to rest. Consider the lengthy reign of dinosaurs on Earth. We know that the first dinosaurs were around by 230 million years ago, and that most dinosaurs go extinct around 66 million years ago. That's a grand total of more than 160 million years ruling Earth's terrestrial ecosystems. And technically, when we consider those modern flying dinosaurs at your backyard bird feeders, it means that dinosaurs have actually been around for more than 230 million years. Most species in the fossil record have a longevity of only a few million years. So if longevity is a measure of evolutionary success, then I'd argue that dinosaurs were and are very successful. This is precisely the reason that the extinction of nearly all dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous period is so very interesting. How and why did such a widespread, diverse, and long-lived group of creatures perish, with only one lineage making it through the apocalypse? In this lecture, we'll explore the devastating end of the age of dinosaurs. We'll place this event into the context of Earth's history, investigate different ideas surrounding the potential drivers of this calamity, and view the extinction through the eyes of both its victims and its survivors, including our own ancient relatives. We divide extinction into two categories. The first and most common kind of extinction is called background extinction, so called because it's going on in the background all the time. The reality is that almost all the time we don't really know the precise reason or reasons that species go extinct, but it's clear that this background hum of extinction characterizes the history of life. So when I said that nearly all the species that have ever evolved on Earth have gone extinct, I was talking about all the species wiped off the planet by background extinctions. These types of extinctions are usually related to a mismatch between a species and its environment. I like to think of this kind of extinction as being driven by environmental change that simply outpaces a species' ability to evolve in step. So when an environment changes more quickly than genetic evolution can keep up, species are pushed into extinction over multiple generations. If you've ever heard that dinosaurs died out because they were allergic to flowering plants, or dinosaurs died out because mammals ate all their eggs, or dinosaurs caught a virus that they couldn't beat, then you've got some familiarity with this notion. Background extinctions tend to impact species with very specific lifestyle requirements. You can think of these groups as being intolerant of much variation in their ecosystems. Once dinosaur evolution really got going in the late Triassic, dinosaurs diversified into a wild array of forms with lifestyles to match. But the very specializations that led to their success during the age of dinosaurs were the same features that placed them at a higher risk for background extinction. The same is true for all kinds of organisms throughout time, then and now. You might consider a geographically restricted species like an elephant, with its highly specialized ecological niche, as an organism that might be particularly susceptible to being the victim of a background extinction. For a long time, scientists hypothesized that perhaps it was this type of extinction that drove dinosaurs to the bitter end at the close of the Cretaceous period. After all, most dinosaur species were geographically restricted large animals with highly specialized ecological niches. They had all the signatures of being perfect targets for background extinction. In fact, this is unquestionably how many dinosaur species did go extinct. When we consider the diversity of dinosaurs through their lengthy rule of Mesozoic terrestrial environments, we have to remember that by the end of the Cretaceous, many thousands of dinosaur species had no doubt already vanished. To take just one example, consider Stegosaurus. This species lived during the Jurassic period and went extinct more than 80 million years before T-Rex's lineage came on the scene in the Cretaceous. That wasn't extinction in a global blaze of glory, but more likely a slower and quieter disappearing act. We often think of the smaller, geographically widespread, and more ecologically tolerant creatures on Earth as having a little more resistance to background extinction events. And this makes sense. If the range of a species encompasses the entire globe, it can tolerate lots of climates and eat lots of different kinds of food. That means it might just be lucky enough to survive somewhere, even during the worst of times. The second, far less common, but far more dramatic type of extinction is called mass extinction. Mass extinctions are fundamentally different from background extinctions. They decimate an unusually large number of diverse animal and plant life in a relatively short period of geological time. During mass extinction events, the percentage of organisms that go extinct is elevated well beyond the average background rate. There have been just 5 mass extinctions recorded in the fossil record over the last 550 million years. We nickname these global crises the Big Five. The 2 oldest of the Big Five mass extinctions happened about 440 and 365 million years ago. These events, known as the Ordovician and Devonian extinctions, decimated biodiversity on a global scale when Earth's climate dramatically cooled. Since most of the planet's creatures thrived in vast oceans, the warm, water-loving marine creatures were driven to extinction. By far, the worst mass extinction in Earth's history took place about 250 million years ago, several million years before dinosaurs evolved. The Permian extinction was caused by intense global warming as huge volumes of lava poured over what is today Siberia, changing the chemistry of Earth's atmosphere and warming oceans to a nice jacuzzi-like temperature. This acidified the oceans, and the Earth turned into a runaway hothouse. The fossil record shows that nearly 95% of all life on Earth was wiped out in this event, and almost resulted in the story of life on Earth reaching a premature end. The fourth of the Big Five occurred at the end of the Triassic period. This extinction was prompted by another bout of volcanism-induced global temperature rise, as the supercontinent Pangaea broke apart. Small early dinosaurs were the lucky survivors of this event, while other vertebrate species died off. The main story of dinosaurs is thus bookended by 2 of the Big Five. At the end of the Triassic period, a giant mass extinction gave the dinosaurs their lucky break, and at the end of the Cretaceous period, the 5th and final of the Big Five extinctions wiped out all of the non-bird dinosaurs. This extinction is referred to as the Cretaceous Paleogene, or KPG event. Why KPG and not CPG? Simple. There's a much older geological time period called the Cambrian, and since it comes first, it gets the honor of being abbreviated with C. You may also wonder why this is no longer called the KT extinction event. Scientists refined the naming of geological periods a few years back, and the term tertiary, the T in KT, was abandoned. Geologists now use the term Paleogene, abbreviated as PG, for the time interval immediately following the extinction. Long before people really even knew what dinosaurs were, the KPG extinction event was noted because of the disappearance of a bunch of easily fossilized marine invertebrates in rocks that were correlated around the world. In fact, the divide between the Mesozoic era and the Cenozoic era is demarcated by the recognition of the KPG extinction. It was easy for early geologists building our first geological timescales to spot this extinction because of the dramatic faunal transition that occurred across this temporal boundary. It's really hard to imagine a scenario that would eradicate a group this diverse and long-lived in a geological instant. It fascinates us while terrifying us. If it happened to them, could it happen to us? Though there is still some debate about whether dinosaurs were already in decline leading up to the KPG event, there is no doubt that their global fossil record demonstrates widespread survival and diversity up to the end of the Cretaceous. Afterwards, except for a handful of birds, the dinosaurs are gone. So what happened? To answer this question, we have to remember that dinosaurs weren't alone. One of the best clues about the nature of extinction requires us to look at the organisms that were wiped out. In the case of the KPG mass extinction event, we need a culprit that can decimate a wide range of diverse species, in the sea, on the land, and in the air. In the sea, the mass extinction of tiny marine algae and plankton occurred, as well as a whole host of marine invertebrates, small and large. All the Cretaceous plesiosaurs and mosasaurs were killed off. On land and in freshwater ecosystems, a wide array of diverse crocodiles, turtles, and freshwater sharks were also hard hit. Over half the known diversity of terrestrial plants was also lost during the KPG extinction. As for terrestrial animals, a whole host of mammals, most tree-dwelling birds, and of course, the entirety of late Cretaceous non-avian dinosaurs, from tiny feathered theropods to the giant sauropods, and everything in between, were culled. The same is true for flying pterosaurs and some species of diving birds, too. It's also important to consider the survivors, of which there were many. Remember, any groups that were present in the Cretaceous that have living relatives had to come through the KPG mass extinction event. This includes a wide array of plants, insects, amphibians, turtles, crocodiles, ground-dwelling birds, snakes, and the ancestors of all the major groups of living mammals. In the search for the smoking gun that caused the KPG extinction, we have to look low and high for evidence apart from the details of who died and who survived. These independent data are found in the Earth's rocks themselves. 66 million years ago, there were two planetary scale disturbances that have alternatively been viewed as competitors or as insidious complements when it comes to delineating the KPG killer. There is no doubt that both events affected the biosphere, but disentangling the contributions of each to the KPG extinction continues to be the subject of intense scientific scrutiny. The first disturbance was a swell of volcanic activity from an igneous province known as the Deccan Traps, located in present-day India. This event resulted in more than 1 million cubic kilometers of lava flooding Earth's surface and the deep sea. That's about 240,000 cubic miles of molten rock coming up from below the Earth's crust. The Deccan Traps erupted over a period of about 1 million years, with several critical pulses just before and after the main KPG event. Two other mass extinction events, the Permian and End Triassic, as well as other major ecological crises in Earth history, have been temporally correlated to flood basalt eruptions like this. These events modify Earth's atmosphere by releasing carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide, which can promote rapid and intense global climate change. Such prolonged volcanic outgassing was sufficient to wipe out enormous numbers of species in the third and fourth extinction events. Perhaps the Deccan Traps increased environmental instability and warming, or sufficiently stressed global ecosystems so that they had become vulnerable, leading to the fifth catastrophic extinction event. The second disturbance rocked science when it was identified back in the 1980s. An approximately 10-kilometer or 6-mile in diameter meteorite struck the Earth precisely 66.6 million years ago, kicking off an undeniable cascade of global calamity. The impact is recorded by the 200-kilometer-wide Chicxulub crater off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula in the Gulf of Mexico. along with a signature of global ejecta that includes a spike in metallic elements including iridium, osmium, and nickel. Other signatures were sedimentological features like tektites, little blobs of melted rock, and shocked quartz, in which the mineralogical microstructure of quartz gets reorganized because of high heat and pressure. Such deformation of the crystalline structure of quartz cannot happen by volcanism and is only known to occur from nuclear weapons, meteorites, and some instances of lightning. The role of the impact in the KPG extinction is no longer debated, but some scientists have questioned whether the Chicxulub meteorite was the sole or main driver of the event. This is partly because, though asteroids and comets have repeatedly collided with the Earth over the last 500 million years, no other mass extinction has been directly linked to an impact event. So what is the latest science on whether Deccan volcanism or the Chicxulub impact acted as the sole, primary, or joint drivers of the extinction? Recent work focused on detailing the timing and environmental effects of the late Cretaceous volcanism in India indicate that at least half of the outgassing occurred tens of thousands of years before the impact. While this outgassing certainly led to the warming of global temperatures, it appears to be comparable to other, more recent warming events that didn't result in mass extinctions or major biotic turnover. Indeed, the data suggest only subtle changes in ranges and community compositions in response to this warming, and conditions likely returned to normal, allowing for the return of pre-outgassing communities before the impact. These new analyses have taken into account climatic, biotic, and carbon cycling data, so they effectively rule out the Deccan volcanism as the sole driver of the KPG mass extinction. That leaves us with only one smoking gun, a huge hunk of rock from outer space. So 66.6 million years ago, life on Earth experienced perhaps the worst day ever. The horror began upon impact in a single precise location that released thousands of times more energy than detonating all the nuclear weapons on Earth at once. The initial impact would have heated, vaporized, and ejected into the atmosphere the surrounding rock and water, sending black carbon dust, ash, and sulfate aerosols into the atmosphere. These particles would have circled the globe within just a few hours. In the minutes and days after the impact, the global re-entry of molten, ejected rock as small particles called spherules is thought to have temporarily raised atmospheric temperatures to the point of spontaneous combustion near the impact site. And pizza oven hot temperatures are likely to have been felt even hundreds of kilometers away. A thin layer of spherules that mark the broiling of Earth's surface can be found worldwide in the geological record of the KPG interval. Many organisms living in terrestrial ecosystems, even those hundreds of kilometers away, may have been incinerated within minutes by this impact fireball and the rain of molten hot rock from the sky. Even thousands of kilometers away, organisms would likely have experienced severe heat stress, leading to death over a period of just a few days after the impact. Wildfires would have raged as these molten particles returned to Earth, burning vegetation over wide swaths of land. Minutes after the asteroid landed in the shallow water in the Gulf of Mexico, a 1.5 kilometer high wave moving at a rate of more than 140 kilometers per hour would have decimated surrounding shallow water and coastal environments. Within the first 24 hours, the resulting tsunami propagated around the world's oceans, devastating nearshore ecosystems on a global scale. After the initial wave, subsequent massive waves continued to pummel coastlines all over the world. In the days to years that followed, vaporized sulfur and nitrogen reacted to form acids, and along with carbon dioxide, these compounds acidified the rain, which in turn acidified the oceans. The lofted black carbon soot and ash circling the globe would have effectively blocked sunlight, plunging the Earth into darkness and dramatically cooling global temperatures. Data indicate that this smoke-like debris was retained in the upper atmosphere, leading to an inhibition of photosynthesis and a global temperature drop of anywhere between 9 to 70 degrees Celsius on land. The resulting shutdown of photosynthesis would have disrupted food webs from the primary producers at the bottom all the way up in a cascade of starvation, from photosynthesizers to herbivores to carnivores. The darkness may have lasted for decades after the impact. Dinosaurs thus perished, along with the many other members of end Cretaceous ecosystems, either in a burning hot, instantaneous inferno or in a prolonged era of dark, cold, precipitous decline. Remarkably, there were creatures that actually survived the KPG event. Some were the unlucky victims of more recent, smaller-scale background extinction events, but some became the ancestors of our modern flora and fauna. Do these survivors have anything in common that can help us begin to piece together the characteristics that allowed them to live on beyond the impact? How in the world did they do it? The short answer is that we're not yet sure. Patterns of survivorship are somewhat mysterious, and sometimes they're at odds with what we observe in our modern world. Take, for example, amphibians. A whole host of salamanders, frogs, newts, and other amphibians come through the KPG event relatively unscathed. But in the modern era, frogs and other amphibians are super sensitive to environmental perturbations. In fact, changes in their diversity have prompted some scientists to suggest that we're at the beginning of a sixth great mass extinction, this one mediated by human-induced rapid climate change. So how did such sensitive creatures make it through the KPG extinction filter? There seem to be several key traits that gave organisms a slight advantage when it came to surviving the apocalypse. These traits didn't guarantee survival, but without at least one of these features, survival was probably impossible. First, widespread ecological generalists were more likely to survive. This is pretty much always true during any kind of extinction event, and it was also true in the KPG. If organisms could tolerate a wide range of temperatures, or eat lots of different kinds of food, or have a population with a global range, they would have been more likely to endure. This might be the case for many tiny marine organisms that made it through the event. Second, animals able to shelter underwater or in burrows may have had a better shot at survival. Because the immediate effects of the impact included intense heat, fire, and acid rain, getting off the surface was probably key. For example, only a tiny fraction of ground-dwelling and aquatic birds present in the late Cretaceous survived the KPG extinction. Their ability to swim, dive, or burrow may have been critical to survival. The same is true of mammalian survivors, all of which were small-bodied animals that may have inhabited burrows, just like many modern small mammals. Third, organisms able to hibernate, estivate, or reduce metabolic requirements through torpor also had increased chances for survival. Some fishes, for example, lungfish, amphibians, small reptiles, including turtles, snakes, and lizards, and mammals may have benefited from these strategies. These creatures may have been able to wait out the worst times in a state of suspended animation, slowing down their metabolism and sleeping through the impact winter. Fourth, species who dined on the dead were more likely to survive. We think that many survivors would have been connected through food webs based on scavenging rather than on primary production. Organisms that are adept at feeding on the dead would have experienced a windfall of food resources. Consider creatures like sharks, turtles, crocodiles, and even some small mammals. When scavenging is combined with other traits, like living in a sheltered freshwater ecosystem and having a flexible metabolism that can allow long periods of starvation, organisms survived across the KPG boundary. Fifth, being small was probably a key characteristic of survivors. As mentioned before, larger and more specialized animals are vulnerable to extinction. Such species evolve more slowly because it takes longer to reproduce, and they need a lot of resources to sustain those big, calorie-expensive bodies. We don't have a fossil record of survivors with body masses over about 25 kilograms. Size really does matter when it comes to squeezing through the KPG extinction filter. Finally, we can never underestimate the power of luck when it comes to surviving mass extinction. Sometimes organisms are just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and sometimes they find themselves in the protected little pocket of the Earth that is a safer haven from the fallout of the event. A little luck never hurts. The KPG extinction annihilated all dominant species, small and large, on land, in the water, and in the sky. The remaining Earth ecosystems were barren, lonely, and devoid of any big or diverse living things for a long while. But in time, planetary diversity was reborn as survivors adapted and radiated into the vacant niches left behind by the extinction's victims. In this way, the impact-generated extinction created opportunity for a suite of diversifications that led to today's global biodiversity. The recovery to pre-extinction levels of diversity may have only taken a few thousand years. The first post-extinction survivors to explode in diversity were fungi and microbes, with a primary feeding strategy focused on detritus, which there would have been an overabundance of at the time. Plants recovered rapidly thanks to the resilient seeds and spores and the potential for asexual reproduction. The plant recovery succession begins with ferns, then gymnosperms, then finally angiosperms. Estimates are that the development of this full pioneer succession on the road to recovery took less than 1,000 years. The new plant communities included a higher proportion of fast-growth species with higher rates of productivity, decomposition, and water cycling, all adaptive in the new Paleogene world. The recovery of primary productivity in ocean ecosystems took a little longer, probably on the order of tens of thousands of years, due to ocean chemistry mediated by both the KPG acidification side effects combined with the secondary Paleogene pulses of Deccan volcanism. One of the most awesome stories of post-KPG adaptive radiation occurs in our own lineage, the mammals. After the extinction, surviving mammalian lineages evolved quickly to fill niches that were left empty. These mammalian survivors were dietary generalists and underwent a rapid diversification in taxonomy while maintaining a relatively conservative body plan. Overall, mammal body sizes increased by nearly 10%, reflecting the release from competition with larger-bodied dinosaurs and reptiles. The mammal radiation transpired in concert with plant adaptation, with the diversification of plants triggering the diversification of mammals. The mammal radiation likely mirrored the plant story with the recovery and diversity in just a few thousand years. A few 100,000 years after the KPG extinction, some mammals were 100 times bigger than the tiny species that squeaked through the extinction to survive. And finally, what about the dinosaurs that survived? The birds. The ground-dwelling, toothless birds that straggled through the darkness of the extinction event would have had to eke out a living on seeds, holding on until the forest returned. Somehow they did, and the regenerated forest yielded a diversity of new habitats ripe with environmental variation that prompted a major adaptive radiation in these dinosaur survivors. Within just a few million years, bird evolution was clicking right along, even producing very large, flightless, predatory birds. The result is more than 10,000 species of birds living today. Like the mythical phoenix, modern birds rose from the ashes of their Mesozoic relatives to continue the legacy of Dinosauria into our times.